Mr. Dark Whispers.
Have you ever considered what kind of stories might frighten a scary story narrator such as myself? Well, what follows are 10 of my personal favorite and scariest stories. It's important to note that this is not a definitive compilation. Instead, these are 10 of the most memorable stories I've encountered from around 2019 onward. Consequently, there are some stories I may have missed that will not be included here. Furthermore, this list is highly subjective, and your enjoyment or dislike of these tales will likely vary based on your own personal tastes. Without any more delay, I hope you enjoy them. On May 19, 2015, my friend John returned home a changed man. That was the night that now haunts his dreams. I once knew him as a bright, happy, and kind individual, but after that night, he was different. John had been a forest ranger in Arkansas for 8 years. At 6 feet 5 inches tall, he was a tough and rather built man who was not easily scared. On that particular night, I had pulled into his driveway at approximately 10:30 p.m. to give him a surprise visit. At the time, I lived in Louisiana, hadn't returned from work yet, so I assumed he might have had to work later than usual, as he had mentioned this sometimes happened. He was unaware of my visit, and I hadn't seen him in 2 years. About half an hour after my arrival, John pulled up, parking his truck beside my little Ford Ranger and shutting off the engine. However, he did not exit the vehicle. I got out of my truck and walked over to his passenger side to open the door. When I did, I was met with the sight of a grown man crying. The smell of alcohol was potent in the air. It was obvious he had been drinking. "John, what's wrong?" I asked him nervously. He continued to cry, so I placed my hand on his shoulder, but he immediately flinched away. "John, it's me, Ryan," I said, thinking he might not have recognized me since I had grown a full beard in the 2 years we had unseen each other. "Come on, man, let's go inside," I told him. He clumsily stumbled out of his truck. I wrapped my arm around him, assisted him in walking, and then helped him over to his sofa, where I sat next to him. "John, what the hell happened to you?" He didn't answer at first, but he did eventually stop crying. He was pale and had an expression on his face like someone who had been to war shell shock, I believe it's called. I repeated my question. He looked at me, with tears drying on his cheeks. "God, Ryan," he said, stumbling over to me on shaky legs and giving me a hug. "You have no idea how happy I am to see you," he whimpered. John had been my best friend since grade school. We grew up constantly hanging out, mostly wandering the nearby woods and climbing trees. As we got into our teens, we would often go camping together. We had never been scared in the woods. The only strange event was finding some weird footprints once, but that is a different story. He let go of me and retrieved a bottle of whiskey from the freezer, pouring a glass for both of us. "Don't you think you've had enough?" I said as he handed me my glass. John had calmed down and ignored my comment. "Can you at least answer my question? What happened?" "John, I don't think I've ever seen you like this before." As I mentioned, he had always been a happy-go-lucky guy. He spoke, "There's some weird crap going on in those damn woods." "What do you mean?" I asked, worried. "Ryan, we found a body today," he replied. I was puzzled. I knew he had found bodies before, but he had never been this distressed about it. "Sorry, man," I said, genuinely feeling for him. "Go ahead, tell me everything." He downed the glass of whiskey in an instant and poured more. "This was different," he said. "This wasn't like the other bodies we'd seen. There was something. Something had been eating him." He sat swirling the liquid in his glass before downing a second one. I was still on my first. "Good God, John, stop." "That's enough," I said, grabbing the bottle and placing it back in the freezer. "Fine," he groaned. I asked him what was eating the man's body. "I don't know. It was like nothing I'd ever seen," he said. I told him to start from the beginning. He began to speak. "I was at HQ when we received a missing person call. The woman said she and her husband had been hiking on one of the more remote trails, when her husband decided to walk a ways off the trail to relieve himself. She waited for 10 minutes for him to return. She yelled for him but got no reply. She went into the trees in the direction she saw him go but couldn't find him. Instead, she found blood on the ground. That's when she called us. My coworker Bill and I immediately packed our gear and headed to the location he was last seen. We didn't have to go far because we found an arm about 100 yards off the trail. The rest of him was about 50 yards further. The sun had already set, but we had our mag lights. When I found him, there was something else, something squatting over him. I could hear it tearing flesh off his body, as it was ripping chunks of meat off him and swallowing them. John began to tear up again, but composed himself and continued. I shined my flashlight to get a better look at what it was. I should have just run. God, I just froze, though. Bill was just terrified. We couldn't move, stood up, and turned around towards us, giving us a full view. It was tall, about 7 feet. Its skin was pale, almost gray, and it seemed like the skin was painfully stretched over old bones. It was so thin, it had a single, large, pure black eye on the left side of its face, too. Its mouth opened, and it made this weird, insect-like clicking sound. It didn't even have a normal mouth. It opened up like a bloomin' flower, like petals filled with rows upon rows of teeth. The mouth seemed to vibrate, too, as it made the sound. He paused, grabbed a cigarette from his pack and lit it. He took a long puff and exhaled. His story sounded insane, but the look of pure fear on his face told me otherwise. From his appearance, he seemed to be telling the truth. Something that, just by the sight of it, has haunted my friend. Whatever it is, it doesn't care if you have family or friends. Something that won't hesitate to rip you apart and devour you bit by bit. Be careful out there. Sometimes you don't know how scary it is out there until it's too late. I reside in the rural part of a village in England. I've always considered myself very fortunate with my line of work and where I live. I was employed by an animal rescue charity, which primarily involved wildlife call-outs rather than domestic ones, though I was quite proficient at getting a cat out of a tree. Back in 1995, there was a particular night while I was on call that I will never forget. It began as any ordinary night. I had just decided to watch a movie when I received my first call of the evening around 9 p.m. The caller informed me that some livestock on his farm had been found dead under unknown circumstances. I advised him that he would need to contact the police or the RSPCA, as we did not handle deceased animals, and I politely concluded the call. A short time passed before the phone rang again. It was the same man, though this time he sounded slightly different. He spoke in what was almost a whisper, as if he were trying to filter his voice. The person became upset that no one would assist him, begging me to come out and help because a wild creature was hunting on their farm. I told him I would see what I could do and took down the address. Upon checking the location, I found it was only 30 minutes from my house. I called my colleague Joe, who lived closer to the village and had worked the same shift as me for about 5 years. We discussed the call and decided we should go and see if we could help. After all, the past few nights had been quite quiet. Soon enough, I pulled up to the address. I knew Joe wouldn't be far behind me. I could see the farmhouse to my right and the top of a barn behind it. There was also a glow from the back, which I assumed was from lights in the yard. I did a quick survey from the drive but couldn't see anyone. After about 20 minutes, Joe finally arrived. As he got out of his car, he told me that the place gave him a very creepy feeling. I recall Joe asking, "This is a farm, right? Then why is it so quiet?" I told him to get a grip, but a second later, I realized he had a point. I was beginning to feel uneasy myself. We were making our way up to the front of the house when something caused us both to stop in our tracks. There was movement in the bushes, a good couple of feet away to our left. Suddenly, there was a mighty growl. It was so deep that it hit me in the bottom of my stomach, sending all my senses into a frenzy. It was truly a fight-or-flight moment. I turned my head to Joe and whispered, "What the hell was that?" Joe was about to answer when we heard whatever was in the bushes moving again. Something large and dark ran out, heading away from us down a small path that appeared to lead around to the back of the house. I did not get a good look at this thing, but I knew it was something I had never seen before. We stood there for a few minutes, gathering ourselves. We looked at each other and, without a word, decided we should continue up to the house and knock on the door. We were still professionals, after all, despite feeling a bit shaken. We approached the porch steadily and knocked. I remember Joe keeping his back to me, constantly checking the bushes and the path to our left. After a few minutes with no response, though, we could hear a TV was still on inside. I knocked again, this time louder. We waited, but there was no answer. As we stood there waiting, I considered what we should do next. Then Joe spoke up, making me jump a mile high. Suggested we go and try to find the back door. I was surprised, as Joe could be a bit of a wimp at times. We looked around and saw that the only path to the back was the same one the dark creature had taken. I decided we weren't going down there, so I desperately searched for another route. I found a gate leading to the yard. We hopped over it since it was chained shut. We stayed close to the house, peering into the windows to see if we could find anyone. Again, there was nobody, but I could see a glow of light coming from what I presumed to be the kitchen. By this point, something deep inside me was screaming to turn around, get in the car, and drive away. I ignored this feeling and continued looking around the property. I'll never forget how silent that place was. It was really getting to me. As we made our way around, we reached the yard, and I pointed out to Joe that the back door was open. I remember thinking this whole situation was so wrong and that we were not the people who should be there. Nevertheless, we made our way over to the back door. I had a sudden, overwhelming feeling that we shouldn't be outside and that we were being watched. I know we shouldn't have, but we entered the house, calling out for anyone who might be there, hoping for a response. I took a quick scan of the kitchen and noticed the phone had been pulled from the wall. It was lying on the floor next to one of our info cards. On the back of the card, I saw my number had been handwritten. While we stood in the house staring at this follow-eye, I still had the feeling we were being watched from somewhere outside, so I quickly shut the back door behind us. The second the door was closed, a deep, low growl came from the other side. But this time, it was slightly different. I'll never forget the sound of it. Whatever it was trying to say something. It sounded like broken speech. After a few terrifying minutes, the sound came again. I stood there, utterly petrified. Something then began to scratch and sniff at the door. I turned to Joe, who had gone pale with fear, and gestured for him to keep quiet. Eventually, the sounds from the door stopped, and I heard the creature moving away outside. We stood like statues for a few minutes until we felt it was safe to move. I thought I should have a look around the house, so I slowly walked through the kitchen into a hallway and saw the glow of the TV coming from a room to the right. I called out again, this time more softly, still terrified by the experience at the door. I needed to know if someone was in as I couldn't believe he was falling asleep at a time like this. He sat up straight and looked at me in a panic. I whispered, "It's okay," telling him that we either needed to lock this house down and stay until sunrise, or we needed to try to make a break for the car. As it was winter, the sun wouldn't rise until 8 or 9 a.m., and I did not want to stay in this place for another 7 to 8 hours. We sat there in silence for a bit longer, considering the options. Then, in the distance, we heard the growling again. It sounded like it was getting closer. Keeping low, I made a move for the hallway. I went to the front door to see if I could open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. Thought it must be locked. Fed up and generally angry because we were stuck in someone else's house, I must admit I used to have a very short temper. I stood up straight and walked back into the kitchen. The back door was a stable-style door with a top and lower half. I unlatched the top half and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Would you just saw it off?" I quickly slammed the door shut, with Joe looking at me in utter shock. Then, from outside, we heard the growl again. Scratching and sniffing at the door grew louder. My anger had put us in danger again. I shook my head and silently apologized to Joe. We waited for another hour, not moving, until these sounds finally went away. I wanted to get out of this house, out of this situation. I made my way back into the hall to try and find a key for the front door, as I was not taking any chances leaving via the back. I searched the few rooms on the lower ground, all of which needed repairs. I found a key in a dresser drawer in the living room, but it wasn't the one I needed. Feeling truly trapped and nearing the point of giving up, I decided to try the front door again. This time, I checked every inch and discovered it wasn't actually locked. It was latched. Upon finding this out, I laughed so hard at myself, all while trying to remain quiet. I was making my way back to the kitchen when I saw a silhouette-like figure in the window, staring directly at me. I froze on the spot, staring back at whatever it was. I still couldn't get a good look at it, as it was so black and it was very dark outside. I couldn't see any eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it. Its gaze was going right through me. I thought, this is it. It's now or never. I was close enough to the kitchen that I could see Joe's back. I softly called his name through my teeth, still maintaining eye contact with this creature. I could feel myself getting more terrified. I called out for Joe again, and he finally came to the doorway. I whispered to him to get down low, and that we were going to make a run for the cars. I remember Joe looking at me and nodding. I told him not to look toward the window, which was to his left, and to just head for the door. Joe got down low and headed toward the exit. When he made it to the door, I told him where he could find the latch to get a hold of it, as we were going to run as fast as we could. After waiting a few minutes, I turned and shouted, "Now." He unlatched the door and threw it open. I ran out so fast. I recall turning around just as I left the door and looking at the window. I could tell that the black mass of the creature had gone. We reached the cars, which luckily neither of us had locked. My car was the closest, so I dove into the driver's seat and Joe jumped in the back. In the corner of my vision, I could see the dark figure moving quickly down the path at the side of the house. This time, I could have sworn I saw it running on 2 legs, not for making me even more confused as to what kind of animal it was. Its stride looked awkward and cumbersome. Feeling seriously beyond freaked out, I started the car, and the two of us sped down the lane. I went straight to the police station. I had driven so fast I nearly crashed the car. Even though it was likely the police wouldn't believe us, I just wanted to be somewhere I could feel a bit safer. When we made it to the station, Joe and I got out, looked at each other, and laughed with relief. Then I looked at the car and noticed a massive dent in the shape of a footprint on the bonnet. It almost looked like a dog's paw print, but it was bigger and misshapen. I looked at Joe and just shook my head. It was now nearly 4 a.m., and I had given my statement to the police. I knew some of the officers quite well. They saw how scared Joe and I were. They assured me they'd go check out the farm when they were able to. The next day, not feeling in the right mind to be alone, Joe said I could stay at his house, as it was nearer to the village than mine. We made it to Joe's, and we both just sat on the sofa, not really saying much to each other. Joe then realized he had left his car at the farm, so he had a call to make. I must have fallen asleep, as the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sun shining outside. I called the station to check if they had attended the farm. They advised me that officers had been there and found the front door shut and were not able to open it. They could hear the TV on inside as well, which made my skin crawl because I had muted it. They advised that the officers had gained entry through an open rear door and found no one inside. They checked over the barn and the yard and didn't see anything unusual. Joe had asked about his car, and they agreed to bring it back for him as he refused to go to the farm to collect it, even during the day. After a few days passed, I received another call from the station. They had continued their search and were informing me that they had found the farmer, who had locked himself in a small storage room in the barn opposite the house. It took them a while to convince him to leave. Once he was out, he just kept rambling about the darkness and how the shadow had killed his animals. I still do not know what was going on at that farm. I have no idea what we encountered, and this is easily my worst experience working in animal rescue. I couldn't be the only one who grew up in a small town with a few resident creeps. I'm not referring to criminals or stalkers, but rather those people who live in the house on the hill or at the end of the street, the individuals everyone knows. We shook hands on a date and a price. As I got back in my truck to leave, I thought to myself that he seemed far less scary than the rumors might have suggested. Although, as I looked over my shoulder to back down the driveway, a flash of movement from the tree line caught my eye. It was only for a second, but I could have sworn I saw a person's face staring out at me from behind one of the trees at the edge of the yard. I had always been told the man lived alone, but I figured it wasn't really that odd for someone to be visiting. So maybe it was one of his out-of-town grandchildren exploring the woods, just like I had always done as a kid. I returned a few days later. Stubborn walnut stumps proved no match for my old D7. When I was done, I knocked on the door and informed the owner that I had finished early, so I'd be billing him for fewer hours of work than anticipated. He smiled dryly and thanked me for my honesty, offering to pay me extra for finishing the job so fast. I initially assured him that it was no big deal, but then he made me a very tempting offer. Asked if I would like to come and hunt on his land. It was the height of deer season at the moment, and I was definitely interested. His entire 250-acre property was ringed with barbed wire fences and no trespassing signs. In fact, everyone I knew avoided the place due to the rumors and stigma surrounding the owner. That meant I would probably have a chance at some pretty nice deer if I took him up on the offer. I eagerly accepted and thanked him for the opportunity. As soon as I had a free weekend, I headed out onto the land. Nearly the entire property was covered in dense forest and pine thickets, so this wouldn't be the usual hunt where one posts up in a tree stand and waits. This would be a real old-school deer stalking. It couldn't have been more than 40 degrees that day, and to make things worse, it was misting rain. It was great weather for hunting, but it certainly made me grateful for my thick clothing and warm socks. I followed a tangle of game trails through the thick woods, seeing plenty of deer tracks, even a few fairly large ones, all leading deeper into the pines and cedars. Should also mention that the woods were incredibly calm and peaceful, as the gloom and chill of the rainy November day had practically put the entire forest to sleep. In fact, other than the occasional rustle of a small animal dashing through the damp underbrush, the only noises were my own footsteps and the soft pitter-patter of raindrops. The rest of the day passed in much the same way. But by 5:15 p.m., it was starting to get too dark to continue, so I decided to turn around and start making my way back to the truck. Luckily, the rain had almost stopped, but a thick fog now hung in the damp evening air. I carefully retraced my steps as the woods became darker and darker. However, just when I was about to pull out my flashlight, I noticed that mine were no longer the only footsteps in the twilight thicket. I stood very still, listening to the movement in the brush as something drew closer. The footfalls were too loud to be a deer, and besides, even a herd of deer is careful and methodical as they move. In contrast, these footsteps were reckless and constant, and I could hear twigs and low-hanging limbs cracking. This, I realized, was the sound of another person traipsing through the woods. I quietly crouched and hunkered down behind the base of a large poplar tree, making myself small in its shadow. I was worried that whoever was coming might have been a poacher, and I certainly did not want to catch a bullet due to being mistaken for an animal in the murky darkness. As the footsteps grew closer, I realized there was definitely more than one person out there in the fog. Even worse, I couldn't tell exactly what direction they were coming from. I could hear voices too, at least two, maybe three, but they sounded muffled and distorted in the thick mist. I held my breath as I listened closely and leaned out from behind the tree just enough to look in the direction of the noise. There, about 20 yards away, was the soft glow of an old incandescent flashlight bobbing through the fog. Silhouetted in that light, I could see three nightmarish figures. At first, I couldn't even make sense of what I was seeing. The three silhouettes looked alien and bizarre, each one an amalgamation of human and animal features. However, on closer inspection, I realized the mysterious shapes were actually strange people. The one in front was wearing a deer's skull and antlers on top of its head, as well as a hooded cloak made from crudely cut animal skin. It also carried what looked to be a shovel over its shoulder and held the flashlight responsible for the glow. The second and third figures stood close together, and they both wore a collection of coyote pelts like bandoliers across their bodies, along with coyote skulls adorning their heads. As I squinted to look more closely, I could see that they were carrying something between them. It was a large tarp or sack, and judging by how the two coyote men handled it, it was heavy. As I watched the surreal column move wordlessly through the undergrowth, there was suddenly a loud rustling in the brush behind me. I snapped around, struggling to bring my rifle to bear, but when I turned to face the noise, I saw that it was only a fat possum. The little thing just stared at me for a few moments before dashing away. But I guess the noise of its passing had gotten the attention of the three animal men, because when I looked back around the tree, the one with the deer antlers had turned and begun to walk in my direction. I held my breath, making myself as small as possible behind the poplar. I silently flipped my rifle's safety off. The deer man drew closer and closer, and the ground on either side of my hiding place was bathed in the yellow glow of the flashlight. My blood thrummed in my ears as my heart beat faster and faster. I didn't know for sure if these people would be hostile, but I wasn't about to pop out and introduce myself all the same. The footsteps of the deer man were very close now. skin was black and wrinkled, the texture of dried leather. Other areas of its body were made up of random patches of black, mangled fur. It was tall and gangly and unbelievably skinny. The creature looked as if it had been malnourished, starving, and desperate, and its sights were set right on me. Every time I moved even slightly, I noticed its breathing would intensify. It was excited, as if any moment I would turn and lose eye contact with it. It could continue its hunt, its rampage towards me. I remembered its piercing eyes, and decided to look at them in the small glimpse of daylight I now had. I lifted my gaze towards its head. The streetlight suddenly flickered. The sunrise was causing the light sensor to diminish the power to the bulb, and it was shutting off. I was tired and not thinking when I flashed my eyes to the light, which I noticed had just gone out. My eyes hit the streetlight. The light went out, and I then heard a long growling coming from that creature. The noise it emitted was low and scratchy, and it sent shivers down my spine. I quickly relocated my eyes back toward the creature, and it was gone. I didn't move for quite some time. The creature had vanished, but the last time that happened, it had covered nearly 25 feet in a matter of seconds, so my guard was up. I scanned the yard intensely. I was shaking. I could feel the cold morning breeze on my cold, sweat-covered body. Minutes had passed, and still no change to the absence of the being. A car passed through the intersection. I hadn't even noticed if cars had passed at all since the thing appeared. I still couldn't find it. I was unsure that the thing had vanished at all. Then there was a beep, beep, beeping. I jumped and shot my head around to evaluate the sudden noise in my room. It was just my alarm. I threw my head back toward the window. There was still no sign of it. Had the creature finally disappeared? Was it unable to be in the daylight? It vanished as the streetlight went out, so it must be gone. Maybe it can only pounce at night. There was a knocking at my door. I gasped. "Turn off your alarm. It's annoying." "Come on, dude, it was just my brother." I sighed with relief and mouthed an almost silent, "Yeah, sorry." Knowing that someone else was within reach, I felt that I could take my eyes off the yard, so I turned to silence my alarm. I felt uneasy, alone, and unsure. I sat in bed and covered myself, attempting to regain composure. The day went by, but many questions clouded my head. Was I going to see it again? Did anyone else see it? I told my brother what happened, and he just chuckled at me. I got the same reaction from my parents, too. Their conclusion was that I had a vivid imagination, so no more scary movies or I'd have more nightmares. This was my situation to handle on my own. To my dismay, it was under the streetlight multiple times after that night. Sometimes it didn't show, but that didn't mean I was just going to bed like nothing happened. I mean, there was no instruction manual for this thing. All I knew was I had to stare at it, blink sparingly, and under no circumstances, nod off. I made that mistake once, and it nearly cost me my life. After a few nights of this, I had a good system going. I would blink about 20 times per hour, so by sunrise, it would only have made it a few steps, which at that point was only the beginning of the lawn. The system worked so well that I became bored. Boredom led to drowsiness. One night I repeated what I had done most every night for a couple of weeks. I don't even remember shutting my eyes, though. I only recall jumping awake to the sound of the screen bursting off the window. My eyes met the creature as it was now frozen in place. One foot on the bottom of my window, and a hand at either side of it, as if it were ready to launch itself at me. Its breathing changed from fast and frantic to slow inhales and exhales, calm like it was sure it would finally get to me. Huge, gnarled teeth and unblinking white eyes expressed anger and yearning. I stared for the remaining hours, and once that sunrise hit, it vanished once again. This nightmare lasted about a month, and then it just stopped showing up entirely. I stayed awake as much as possible for the next year after that, until I slowly began to regain a normal life. 5 years passed, then 10. Now I'm 32, sitting at my desk writing this post at about 6:30 a.m. with a cold cup of tea to keep me company. I'm submitting this experience everywhere I can, in an attempt to reach out to someone who may have seen this thing. I need to know if others are seeing what I am seeing, and if they have any answers for me. I'm asking because I think it's back. Last night, it managed to climb up 4 stories to my apartment's balcony. I accidentally spotted it on my way back from the kitchen with a hot cup of tea. It was only just getting its other leg over the railing outside the sliding door. That freaking look on its face, it almost had me. If you know what this is, comment below, because I don't think I can do this again. I experienced something in the summer of 2013 that still haunts me and continues to make me question my sanity. My girlfriend Anna and I had decided to go camping as a last farewell to summer and to get some alone time. She would be going back to college soon after, and I wouldn't see her as often. We had been together for over 2 years then, and I was completely head over heels for her. I was even thinking about asking her the question. So, on a weekend in early August, I packed up my camping gear, driving 45 minutes away to the park we often frequented. It was a nice park, thick with trees and wildlife, along with a small creek running through it. We knew the area well, since my friends and family had camped there since childhood. I sent a text to Anna after parking my car, letting her know that I'd made it and would set up camp in our favorite spot. You see, Anna had been caring for her sick grandmother all summer, and her sister had finally agreed to watch her so that Anna could get away for a while. But she had to wait for her sister to get off work around 5 p.m. to relieve her. To save time, I had volunteered to go ahead and set things up. I trekked up the trail a bit until I found the spot we always camped at. It was nice and level and was right beside the creek. I immediately started setting up the tent. I wanted to get everything done fast so Anna wouldn't have feeling sick and to suggest that we pack up and get a motel for the night. But when I unzipped the tent and crawled in, I found her sound asleep in her sleeping bag. I contemplated waking her up so we could leave, but she looked so relaxed that I decided against it. I went back outside and finished cleaning up camp, putting out the fire before I laid down next to her in my own sleeping bag. I had a bit too much wine and fell asleep quickly. Morning came soon enough and filled the tent with a soft glow as I listened to the birds singing outside. Anna was still sound asleep, so I decided to get up and start some breakfast. 15 minutes later, I was admiring the meal I made well, as much as one can admire slightly runny scrambled eggs from a pouch. I poked my head back into the tent to tell Anna that breakfast was ready, but that's when things got even weirder. Anna wasn't there. I didn't think it was likely that she could have left the tent without me seeing her, but maybe she had done so while my back was turned. I waited for a bit, figuring she'd stepped out when nature called. About 15 minutes passed and I was starting to get worried. I walked to the edge of the campsite and called out for her, but there was no response. I walked to the trail and called out her name as I walked up and down the path each way, but still nothing. I went back to the campsite and checked the tent, but it was still empty. I searched for her belongings, but that's when I realized she hadn't brought a thing with her. I couldn't even remember her checking her phone last night, which she was in the habit of doing. She always checked her phone, always brought it with her in case her grandma needed her. That's when I grabbed my phone and decided to text her. I didn't have any signal, so I walked back up the trail a bit to the truck, where I knew the signal was good. That's when the text messages started flooding my screen, all of them from Anna. My hands began to tremble as I read. "I have something to tell you." That was the text I saw earlier. It went on. "It's bad news. My grandma just passed away. Are you there? Can you meet me at Grandma's when you can? I can't go camping tonight, I'm sorry. We should reschedule." "Where are you?" "Fine. I'll be at my sister's house for the night. Call me when you can." My hands were shaking so violently that I dropped my phone. My mind reeled so fast that I had to fight to not pass out. I ran back to the campsite and searched it, but there was no evidence of Anna or anyone else being there. I checked the tent to look at her sleeping bag that had clearly been used last night. I even checked the garbage bag to confirm that there were, in fact, 2 plates from dinner last night, one with food still on it. I ran back to the truck and sent Anna a text, because I did and trust my voice not to tremble if I called her. I told her I got really sick last night and couldn't text her back. I apologized profusely and offered my condolences about the passing of her grandma. She texted me back, letting me know she was okay and that I would see her later today. I walked back to camp in a daze. My mind seemed to want to shut down. I couldn't process what had happened. At first I thought I was going crazy, thought I'd had a breakdown and imagined everything. But the used sleeping bag and uneaten dinner told me differently. Who or what kept me company last night? Who or what could look just like Anna but not be her? Had it been a ghost? A doppelganger? A shapeshifter of some kind? Was all of it just a sick joke? I packed up camp with difficulty. My stomach was a knot and my muscles were weak. I felt like I was going to get sick at any moment. I made it home and sent a text to Anna. I said I was still sick and didn't want to make her sick. I saw her next at the day of her grandma's funeral, where I easily passed off my residual anxiety about the whole ordeal as grief and sympathy. As I said at the beginning, I haven't told this story to anyone. Anna and I are now happily married, and I still haven't even told her. We don't go camping in those woods anymore. We found a much nicer, hopefully safer spot. I look back on that night often. I replay all the scenes in my head, trying to find hints that will lead me to an explanation, but I haven't figured out anything. I still only know one thing. I spent the night with someone or something that was on my girlfriend. Talk to anyone around my age about camping when they were young, and they'll tell you all about their proverbial good old days. I suppose I'm no different, really. We used to go and get plastered in every grove and gully from here to Florida. It's not like we had much else to do. School was a joke. We were young and stupid, and we didn't have a care in the world. Funny enough, when you go camping as much as we used to, it becomes less like camping and more like just hanging out. I mean, really, every summer, every weekend, all the time we had to spare, you could expect us to be in some backwoods hollow raising heck. So, as you can imagine, most of the memories of those days I have are just kind of one big blob. Not this one. Out here, federal land means free roam to us. I never really knew why the feds latched themselves onto so much nothingness. But they did, and it created for us our very own little slice of the wild. Rarely did we see or even hear anyone else out there. The only other human beings within 50 miles were the army squads that used the woods as training grounds pretty regularly. They had a whole grid and label system set up out there, and thanks to a kid named Tommy's dad, we had gotten our hands on one of the maps. We navigated with the grid's markers and numbered features and all kinds of other minute individually specified details. Even now, people refer to my hometown area as hill country, high sandstone cliffs with winding, dusty paths stretching far into the sky, as well as low, dark valleys where the air felt as good as conditioned. The land's bordered on a big military base, so generally speaking, the town was an army town. Of the small group of guys we had that went out, all but one was a military kid. Now, I'm not saying that army families always have trouble in them, but it would be ignorant for me to not say that they did more. of hill number 28, ending up somewhere along the 36-2001 area. It became mine and Mika's job to work our way up hill 29 and set up a communication tower so the two groups could keep in contact. Everyone set off like a little pack of GIs, eventually diverging on our separate ways. Mika and myself, with pieces and parts lashed to our pack frames, began the ascent to the sandy reaches of hill 29, as the rest of the guys headed deeper into the rapidly darkening woods. We made up our minds to be swift about the task, as it would be pitch black within the hour, and our flashlights weren't exactly the brightest. The climb was rough in patches, with rather sheer rock slides that were only made navigable by the protruding roots that served as our natural handholds. We made it to the peak area as the sun was setting and worked out a setup for the tower. Soon, it was erected and ready for relay. "Hey Jake, think we'll pick anything up?" Mika had a set of headphones plugged into the box, rotating a dial. "Don't know. Probably not." "How strong is it?" I replied. "Oh, if we heard anything, it'd be army in the area. Save for that, I'd be surprised if anything were close enough," Mika answered, while digging into the OD green carrying case. He produced another set of headphones from somewhere within the plastic box and gestured for me to take them. I slid them down over my ears and listened in. I could faintly hear Mika as the static flickered back and forth over the radio. Little but faint murmurs came through, with static to fill the gaps. Mika sat back, looked at the device again, and switched the dial over. A sudden new patch of static filled my ears as Mika began to carefully rotate the knob. For a minute, I thought we'd hear nothing when the radio picked up the faintest of signals. I could only pick up small phrases between the static. "We'll go right side. Over the south." The channel then reverted back to static, and we could no longer hear anything. "I wonder what that was about," Mika pondered, removing the headphones. "Probably some army drill or something," I replied, placing my own headphones back into the case. The sun was getting really low. Well, we ought to be getting down to camp. At this rate, we'll be getting there by dark. If they don't have the fire set up by now, I'll strangle one of them. He trailed off as he packed his things. We began back down the steep trail towards the turn and headed for camp. It was dark, as Mika predicted, when we finally trudged into camp. Two rather basic wooden sheds we debuilt some time back stood illuminated by a fire contained in an old metal fire ring. We ate a hasty meal of canned garbage, radioed the camp across the hill to check the comms, then fell asleep. I woke up maybe half an hour before the crack of dawn and did what all campers do upon awakening. I walked what felt to be a suitable distance from the campsite and took care of business. Then I decided to head down to a nearby stream, as the first pastel lights of morning cut their way through the sky. I washed my face and took a drink. I plunged my arms into the cold water, and as I did so, a crack and a screech faintly bounced across the valley. Perplexed, I stood up and strained my ears for more, but it never came. This was a strange occurrence, sure, but I'd certainly encountered stranger. Besides, I was pretty sure I knew what this one was. If you've never heard a cougar scream, well, I'll say that I can understand why the old settlers told stories of monsters in the hills. I made my way back to camp and began to throw some more logs on the fire. Soon, the crackling of flames eating away at dry logs awoke the guys. Within a few minutes, the camp was full of life. Herschel and Tommy were frying up some bacon over the fire. Mika and Porter collected wood, and I busied myself cleaning one of the 2 hunting rifles we brought. The rifle itself was Porter's, or rather his dad's, a rugged old bolt-action chambered in. 308 with a short, nondescript scope set atop. The other rifle, Tommy's, was a touch newer, a sleek cylinder. 22 made for small things, squirrels and the like. For today, we'd planned a short hunt, as it might just be the only full day when we weren't drunk or hungover. After sitting down to eat our breakfast and some messing around with each other, we loaded up our packs, then set off with either a rifle or binoculars in hand. Porter and I would set off on the middle elevation areas in search of deer or anything else substantial. And Tommy, Mika, and Herschel would go about bagging some squirrel or rabbit. Neither of those animals was in season, but that wasn't something that was enforced, nor that anyone really cared too much about for that matter. Each group took a radio and took off. As we trudged into the woods, light flecks of rain began to mist across our shirts and soon warranted a deployment of our army ponchos. The cliff trails were soon slick with mud, as our leather boots left tracks behind us. Every now and again, we would stop at an overlook, scan with the scope and binoculars, and see what we could find. We saw some light movement on the other side of the valley, and very little aside from that. We walked on into the afternoon in the misty rain, stopping to have some lunch of canned sausages and sandwiches. Soon, we were on the move again. The rain began to fall with more force now, at a full rainstorm pace. On one of our stops to search the valley, Porter picked up more movement. "There, next to the pine," he said in a subdued breath. "Yeah, I got it," I replied, equally as hushed. "Buck." "Yep," he excitedly whispered. He began to dial in his scope. I heard the click of his safety moving into the off position. Suddenly, a shot cracked through the valley, followed by 3 more in rapid succession. The deer raised its head, turned for an instant, and took off into the woods. Utmost urgency. The radio replied, "What? What are you talking about?" Mika responded, confused. "It's not funny, dude. Screaming and shooting stuff in the woods is just a dirtbag move." "That wasn't us," it replied. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" the radio responded. "It wasn't us. We're trying to figure out if you're okay." Mika was growing in anger again. "What? I mean, yeah, we're shaken, but no one's hurt." JT said he'd been trying to reach somebody. "I guess that was you guys. We've been in this cave, JT, and some other guys found a bit north. We're gonna hang tight, and hopefully this crazy jungle stop happening. Maybe not a bad plan. Stay in contact. The radio should be working now. Sorry about the misunderstanding. It's no big deal. Just stay safe. Meet us at the radio down inside." Paused for a moment and thought about the events we just witnessed. Mika called down to Porter, who said they'd faintly heard the noise and had tried reaching us. He said they'd stay and make contact with the other group to try and set up someone to reliably contact. "Well, while we're up here, might as well check the weather," Mika said, finally relaxing a bit. He tuned the radio to the weather on the next frequency. "Days we have some flooding issues in the lower valley regions. So if you're in those areas, roads will likely not be safe to travel on. Many local towns have declared a shutdown of most roads in order to... ... double quotes. Did they say here?" I asked aloud, realizing what this might mean. "That's just great. Now we can't even leave," Herschel exclaimed, hearing the bad news. "Yeah, looks like we're stuck here, at least for the night." I sighed. "If we're gonna be here, let's at least try to enjoy it, guys," Mika said, standing up. "Let's head back to camp. It's been 2 days out here already and we haven't even touched our cooler. Let's go get plastered." And that's what we did. By the next morning, we were up far later than was normal, all of us sporting head-splitting hangovers from the night before. Herschel groaned as he sat up, setting the precedent for everyone else. We all slogged up slowly and doggedly set about our tasks. We were all doing our best to ignore the prior events and try to enjoy ourselves, at least a little. The ever-present rain made it hard to get a fire going. Fortunately, Porter and Tommy had occupied themselves with the acquisition of firewood the day before and had stored nearly half a cord in the shed. Using the old maul stored there, the group enjoyed a rather slow and tired breakfast of hotcakes and bacon, a warm refresher from the previous day's meal. For a while, it seemed like all was going normal again. It was still raining, not as hard as it was, but nonetheless. So we sat just inside our Adirondack sheds, talking and laughing. We killed maybe 3 hours doing that. The day passed by inevitably as dark clouds continuously rolled over our heads. The fire crackled as a meal cooked. Porter moved towards the fire and stirred the pot. A horrible stench wafted up out of it. "Jesus," Mika remarked. "What did you do to that thing?" "I don't know, maybe I overcooked it," Porter replied, perplexed. Tommy, Herschel, and myself shared the sentiment with Mika. We reluctantly dug out our eating equipment and spooned ourselves some of the thick, terrible-smelling stew. We sat back down in our sheds and slowly began to eat, with pinched noses. To everyone's surprise, the soup was delicious. We all looked at each other, shrugged, and kept eating. Soon the cooking pot was empty. We cleaned our bowls and equipment, only to find that the smell persisted. Confused, Herschel spoke out. "What is that smell? It's awful," he said in disgust. "It's not one of you," Tommy jabbed. "No, I don't think so," I said, holding my nose. We tried to play it off, to ignore it, but it was to no avail. A few moments passed as our resolve to continue disregarding the stench that invaded our nostrils faded gradually. Herschel was the first to crack. "Hell with this. What is the friggin' smell?" he blurted out. "You're right, I can't stand it. We gotta find whatever that is and chuck it off a cliff or something," I replied in utter agreement. We fanned out and began searching, checking around the site until Porter called out in surprise. "Hey, guys, you ought to come look at this." Porter's accented voice faded out as we rushed over to see what he was looking at. His dark eyes were fixated on the ground at the base of a tall oak, just maybe 50 feet down the slope at the back of the campsite. The scattered members of our group slowly and apprehensively made their way to the spot. We strained to peek around the trees or Porter, whichever obstructed our views. There, at the base of the tree, lay a jagged lump of puffy white and brown fluff and shiny dark liquids. The tree itself was spattered with the same. It was a deer misshapen, contorted, sliced, and torn apart. All of us knew from hunting when we were younger that it was relatively fresh. The blood was still bright, the flesh still red and not brown. Bones jutted out from various places within the small pile of creature, cracked like a glow stick. Now bemused, I looked to the others for an explanation, a plan, a concession, anything. I soon found that they matched my expression, and that there was no such reasoning to be heard of. Wordless, we turned to make the slow, cautious retreat back into our nearby encampment. I think we could have stayed silent for the rest of the trip, if it were not for what happened next. As we stepped into the edge of our sight, Tommy began to pick up some of his things and moved into the sheds. He returned, clutching an axe he brought. The rest of us gave but a mere concerned look before inevitably coming to the same conclusion that he'd reached before us. That being, we weren't alone out here. As if a stage cue had been issued, the situation immediately escalated. Behind myself, there was a crack of a stick. A dreadful quiet fell over us as Porter aimed towards where he last saw the looming dark mass. A moment passed, a mere second that felt like an eternity. The silence was shattered by two deafening booms in rapid succession, booms that made my ears ring. The dark shadow appeared once more, this time fleeing. The heavy and steady patterning thump of footfalls returned deep into the woods once more. And as they faded away, the whole encampment faded to silence for yet another time. It seemed now that all of these significant events which we experienced were marked by a silence, a quiet of some kind. We all got up and looked around, as if we hadn't really seen any of it, as if we'd all just imagined everything. But now things were different. It was no longer this sort of unrealized game of cat and mouse. Now we knew what we were into. Now we knew that we weren't just seeing things. Now it was us and them. We all realized this as we set about solemnly patching up Tommy and packing our bags. The rain and the flooding couldn't have been that bad. We had to get out. We all sat down back at our propped logs near the fire that was now smoldering. "We gotta go," Mika said, voicing all of our thoughts. Tommy, Porter, Herschel, and I mumbled in agreement. "But we can't try in the dark," Porter said, sounding just as apprehensive as we all felt. "We have to." "What the hell are we going to do if that thing comes back?" Herschel blurted. We shuddered at the first mention of the creature we'd seen since it happened, as if somehow speaking of it gave it life and made it reality. "Herschel, we can't. With all the hills and slopes and crap, we just plain can't make it through in the dark." Porter pressed on. "I know, Hell, man, we're in a shaky spot right now." And he trailed off. We knew that Porter was right. We'd have to stay one more night. That didn't stop us from completely mobilizing as the sun set, though. By the time darkness descended upon the site, we'd gathered enough firewood to light up almost 50 feet around us in all directions and had packs lined up. Completely packed save for our sleeping bags, which were lashed onto the outside. We divided up shifts. Porter would start at 9 p.m. and go until midnight, standing watch with the rifle. Porter would wake Mika, who took 12 to 2 a.m., followed by Herschel at 2 to 4, and eventually me from 4 to sunrise. Tommy needed to rest and heal from his leg. The sun was getting low, so we retreated to our shelters, grabbing some additional firewood on the way. Porter examined his rifle, rubbed a mark off the barrel, and chambered around. He sat down onto his upturned log, sighed, and pulled his head lower. "You good to go?" Mika inquired. "Yeah, I'll wake you up in 3, he replied, clearly shaky. "Good luck, man. Don't hesitate to get us all up, if anything, if you need us," Mika finished. After a bit, yeah, Porter resolved, tugging at his hat again. The rest of us laid down and waited. According to my watch, Herschel shook me awake at 3:56 a.m. "Hey," he said in a deep, hoarse voice. "Hey," I replied, just as exhausted. "Still plenty of wood. Nobody's seen anything yet," he informed me as I exited my sleeping bag and stood up, pulling on my boots and tucking my arms into a button-up shirt. It was surprisingly chilly. "Enjoy the sleep, dude. Wish me luck," I said, slapping him on the back as he went for his own bag. "Let us know if anything goes wrong." "You're up till sunrise," he drowsily stammered, tucking his face into a sleeping bag. I moved to the fire and saw that Herschel had chucked on a few logs, before plopping back down next to the fire. I resolved to keep a good watch of the stretch of tree line where we'd seen the thing before. Seconds turned into minutes, and minutes to hours. The creatures of the dark chirped and howled as the fire crackled. The night grew colder, and I was glad for the flames. Aside from warmth, the blaze allowed me to see around myself. The stars and moon were bright dots painting the sky, lighting up the night, allowing me to see even farther. I could faintly hear the creek at the base of our site, emitting a distant trickle. A cool, nearly imperceptible breeze flowed through my hair and whisked away sparks and embers of the fire. The tall trees of the valley swayed and danced like ancient deities engaged in a sleepy waltz. The sky opened itself as if it were the spotlights upon the theater that was the valley, with curtains of pines and solemn stone faces. Now my eyes grew heavy as the hands of the great forest gently shut them for me. I awoke from my near catatonic state to what I believed to be pine resin in my fire, cracking louder than usual as it sometimes does. I put together the thoughts to check my watch. Finding it was now nearly 6:30, the sky was beginning to light up. The fire popped loudly again, but something was off. I kicked key. It took me a minute to realize that the fire behind me was not giving off much light anymore, nor was I being warmed. I turned to face it. It was smoldering, nearly out. I murmured an expletive and tossed on a few new logs. Soon, the fire was going again. I was about to drift off again before my brain finally realized what felt so wrong. How did the fire pop so loudly if it was out, with impeccable timing? Another pop rang out. Fully awake, I placed it as a distant noise. It was a gunshot. No. I spoke softly to myself, beginning to realize what was happening. That ear-ending scream I knew all too well boomed through the valley again. My stomach sank. I felt like a kid who was about to be sick on a county fair ride. I stood alone, listening still. Another, shorter groan echoed again and snapped me out of it. I turned toward the shed. "Guys, hey guys," I yelled, panicking. There was stirring in the shelters. What? Mika said, standing up. "Listen," I demanded frantically. Ick. Mika called out loudly. No reply. No surprise there. We descended into the valley toward the campsite, and soon we could see the large shapes of the shelters in the afternoon sun. We broke the tree line into the camp's clearing, and what we saw was bizarre. The site was vacant. Called out again, but it truly was vacant. There were loose belongings here and there, shirt, a water bottle, and even a pocket knife. Duh. The shelters were slightly charred, and the remains of what once was a tent was now a few metal poles and shreds of fabric. A lone yellowed note, clearly soaked in rain, was left just inside the shelter under a rock. We tried to make out the words, but what we were able to read was, "We had to leave. Radio 1, T. Meet back." Mika read the mostly unintelligible note. "They're already gone," he concluded. "God, I hope they made it out." Tommy trailed off. "God, I guess we're on our own now and we gotta get the heck out of here," Porter said firmly. We turned and began to mobilize. Porter and myself began to help Tommy up, who was sitting on the ground. Shouted a gruff, deep voice, startling us all so badly we nearly dropped Tommy. Mika turned, reaching for his .22 and facing whatever it was. As I faced it as well, I was taken aback. A tidy row of about 6 green-clad troopers stood, each clutching weapons. Several were wearing pack frames with pressurized tanks strapped to them and all kinds of hosing running all over. Others clutched heavy rifles, but all of them were armed to the teeth. They were fanning themselves out and checking around the site like some cheap movie scene. "What are you doing here?" demanded one of the soldiers, stepping forward with his rifle thankfully lowered. We were camping," I replied. "Why'd you bypass all the signs? This place is on lockdown." "What signs?" Tommy inquired. "This land has been off limits for 4 days now. We shouldn't be here." "We've been out here nearly a week," I responded. "Listen, you shouldn't be here and you need to go. But we have some questions first." This gave me a bad feeling. "Do you know this area well?" he inquired. We nodded. "Do you know how to get out the fastest?" We nodded again. "Are you armed?" We were confused, but murmured a yes again. This time, he nodded, as if to say, "Good." "All right," he said. "We're looking for a unit who was sent out on an evasion exercise." I perceived immense mistruth in this excuse. "Have you seen anything?" For a while, you knew what they were looking for. "Yeah, that way. Past the 3rd hill, there's another campsite just like this one." "It ran in and out of the trees there," Mika said, sounding almost irritated. The soldiers seemed to take it aback when Mika so confidently delivered the answer he wanted. I think he knew that we knew. The soldiers sighed again. "I need you all to get out of here now," he commanded, sternly but relentingly. "And if you don't want trouble, stay away." My desire for answers was quickly outweighed by my need to get away from this thing in the woods, and looking to the others, they nodded in agreement. We slung on our packs, and the soldiers made their ways out. We then set off back up the trail. The walkout was our final silent checkpoint in the timeline of our bizarre experience. Eventually, the green tunnel developed some holes, and soon we stood next to our truck. We loaded our gear and started it up, piling in. We talked retrospectively about what we'd seen. I think we all didn't or couldn't believe that it all happened, and talking through it made us feel like we could truly think about it. We'd have to track down the other group when we got back and figure out what they'd be seeing. We sat for a bit, and eventually we set off for the winding, hilly back roads that would lead us back home. As we passed the "Now Leaving" sign written in plain white, dremeled letters, a thin column of black smoke arose from the forest, from right on the other side of hill number 29. It has taken a long time for me to come out and be more public about this experience in my life, as I have repressed it due to it being a terrible and traumatizing experience. This experience happened in Hardington, Nebraska. During turkey hunting season in 2015, the specific plot of land that my friend Jackson and I were hunting on was labeled private because the hunting was really good there. And the owner of the land is notoriously mean and tight with who he lets hunt on the land. Luckily and unluckily, Jackson is friends with the owner of the land we hunted. Since remembering this experience, it permeates my mind with horrifying clarity. It was 5 o'clock in the morning when Jackson and I arrived at the beginning of the land, so that we could get to the spot where turkeys roost. For folks who don't turkey hunt, these creatures are pretty intelligent. The slightest sound you make might spook them, so you have to get to your post before they wake up. with complete silence. Immediately when I set foot on the land, I had a very uncomfortable feeling, but I eventually ignored it. I hadn't been back here in a year, so it felt much less familiar to me thanks to the time gap. The process of hunting and getting our turkeys went very well, just like many times before in the past. After we both shot our turkeys, we picked them up and went to Jackson's grandparents' house to butcher and clean up the kills. After we got all that done, it was roughly 1 in the afternoon. Since Jackson wanted to go back to check his trail cam later at night, we decided to go get another memory card. The day after that was uneventful. We just did the same busy work at his grandparents' farm until dark. The whole time I had this feeling in my stomach that I couldn't really pinpoint. And yet again, I chalked it up as random stomach problems that I often have throughout the day. Once it was dark outside, we began to make our way back to the plot of land with the trail cam. As we drove over there, I saw a flock of crows fly past. I took this as a bad When I turned, I saw what caused me to repress my memories for so long. I can only explain it as an entity of some kind that measured about 8 feet tall. It was running straight at me when I looked, but the figure was composed of complete darkness, like some sort of animated shadow. Think of the darkest environment you can, and relate that to the color of the figure I was seeing. The scariest part was that while it was running, it was not like any run you could do with 2 legs. Whatever it was doing was more of a scuttle, all the while making absolutely no noise. This is impossible due to there being dead branches and leaves littering the forest floor. When I initially saw this entity coming right at me, it was about 75 yards away. But I blinked once, and the distance instantly shrank to only 25 yards. Staring at this thing running towards me, I noticed that it had no distinguishable features, until it opened what appeared to be a jaw. Inside were hundreds of thin, sharp, needle-like teeth, tips glossed over with what appeared to be a red color, as if it had killed recently. While this thing was doing this, eyes protruded on its body from seemingly nowhere. These eyes were red with a hint of yellow thrown in. Struggling to breathe in my panic, I grabbed the 12-gauge Remington Super Mag and fired in its direction 3 shells. My ears rang, and I became briefly deafened. As I shook my head and looked back at the creature, it was still coming unscathed. But I did notice a blister in the tree behind it. One of the shots that should have hit had gone straight through. I turned and ran, but I knew it would catch me. If something could travel 50 yards in the blink of an eye, I was honestly surprised that I wasn't dead yet. The entire time I ran, I could hear my name in that same voice as before being called from behind me. At the same time, I began to scream Jackson's name, hoping that he would find me. After a minute or two, I finally heard him yelling my name to the right. I yelled back at him, but I was already so close to the truck that I just told him to pile in with me, peeled out, and we left the hunting ground. Jackson had plenty of questions, but I wasn't in the mood to talk for a while. I don't go back to that hunting ground anymore. I'm too afraid to go back to that land, and I wish I had any idea as to what I saw that day, but I don't.